Hey guys! Tonight, as the fog curls through the alleys of Victorian London and the frost paints lace across the windows, take a deep breath and settle in. Like the fires that burned through this long, grey city, this story will keep you warm while you rest. If you're here with me now, tap the like button, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Because somewhere in this sleeping world, the same cold air once touched every soul we'll meet tonight. The kind that bites the skin, whispers through cracks, and makes you wonder how anyone ever survived it. The air smells of coal, wet stone, and a little hope. From the river, half frozen and gleaming like hammered steel, comes the faint moan of shifting ice. Gas lamps flicker in the mist, their halos trembling. The streets are empty but restless, breathing, alive. Somewhere a door closes, a kettle whistles and a cart rattles by while its wheels clattering like clockwork through fog. London doesn't sleep, it endures. The city holds its breath as chimney smoke drifts upward into a sky the colour of pewter. You walk slowly, hearing your own footsteps echo through the stillness, and the cold seems endless, ancient, and strangely human. Tonight, we'll wander through this frozen world together. We'll listen to the heartbeat of its houses, the scratch of its fires, the small miracles and stubborn rituals that kept people alive before modern heat ever existed. You'll feel the cold they felt, see the quiet beauty they built in spite of it, and maybe understand how warmth was once something you earned. One breath, one flame, one prayer at a time. So stay close. The night is long, but we're not alone. The fires are waiting, and they remember everything. You can't imagine a Victorian winter without the sound of a fire. It was more than warmth. It was a pulse, a heartbeat echoing through the wooden bones of the house. The air inside smelled of coal and damp wool, with a faint sweetness of bread carried from a nearby kitchen. Flames flickered against the walls, painting orange veins across faded wallpaper. The hearth didn't just heat the room, it gave it meaning. Without it, silence felt colder, emptier, and somehow less human. Mornings began long before sunrise. Someone, often the mother, sometimes a servant, always the patient one, would kneel before the ashes, hands red from yesterday's labor. She'd strike the iron poker against the grate, coaxing the embers awake with breath and prayer. When the first spark caught, it was a small resurrection. The room exhaled, light bloomed like forgiveness. Children stirred upstairs, hearing the promise of tea or porridge. Every morning was the same small miracle, survival renewed through flame. But the hearth was never merely a tool, it was a witness. It saw more truth than any neighbor, holding space for both laughter and grief. Around it, people spoke softer. Secrets felt safer beside the fire's crackle, as if honesty could hide in the sound. Fathers read letters from distant sons. Lovers whispered plans they could never afford. Even anger seemed different here, less cruel, more human. Flames demanded attention, and while they burned, no one could pretend to be indifferent. Still, fire was work, relentless and proud. Too little coal and it sulked, too much and it punished. The art was balance. Housewives learned to read flame like language. A bright tongue meant hunger. A steady orange meant gratitude. The poker, the shovel, the bellows, these were extensions of instinct, as intimate as breath. To keep a fire alive through the night was to earn peace. To let it die too soon was failure whispered into the dark. When daylight waned, The hearth took center stage again. Children played in its glow, shadows stretching across the floor like stories made of smoke. Neighbors might stop by, cheeks pink from cold, just to share a cup of tea and the comfort of company. Laughter sounded louder near firelight, as though joy itself burned brighter against winter's hush. Outside, frost spread its quiet rule across the city, but inside, time slowed, softened, forgave. Even in grief, the fire remained. During sickness, it kept vigil. During mourning, it warmed hands that didn't know what to do. There are accounts of widows who sat before the dying coals long after midnight, speaking softly to the glow as if it could listen. Maybe it could. Fire doesn't answer, but it remembers. The Victorians understood that warmth wasn't comfort, it was commitment. Every spark meant labor, patience, intention. Fire never came easily. That's why they treated it with reverence. To sit beside it was to acknowledge the effort it took to keep it alive. When the night deepened and conversation faded, only the hearth remained, steady, breathing, a small rebellion against everything cold and vast beyond the door. The houses of Victorian London looked strong from the outside, all brick and posture, but inside they betrayed their residents nightly. The walls were thick yet hollow. The wind learned every route through them. It came in whispers, curling around ankles, tugging at curtains. Windows grew skins of frost, delicate as lace, and ceilings dripped with the slow tears of condensation. Even in comfort, you could hear the house breathe uneasily. The wealthy tried to outsmart the cold. They hung velvet curtains, stuffed gaps with cloth, lined doors with sand snakes. Carpets muffled footsteps, but not the chill rising from beneath. Fireplaces appeared in every room, though few could afford to use them all. Bedrooms were the cruelest. Once the fire downstairs dimmed, the cold crept upward like tide reclaiming shore. Sheets stiffened until the warmth of bodies softened them. The first breath in bed was always visible, as if sleep began with surrender. Poorer homes told harsher stories. In the East End, entire families huddled in a single room around a coal stove that coughed more smoke than heat. The air stung with soot, yet they laughed anyway. Laughter steamed, visible proof of life. Frost bloomed on walls like white mold, and the floorboards groaned under wet boots. Children woke with ice on their blankets, but still rose to sweep, to fetch, to endure. They called it making do, though it was closer to art. Every Londoner knew the sound of a draught, that low, unholy hum slipping between window panes. Some stuffed paper into cracks, others ignored it, pretending the cold was part of the family. And in a way, it was. It shaped character, carved humility, enforced gratitude. The city was a grand experiment in endurance, and somehow, endurance became beauty. At dawn, you could tell how cold the night had been by the color of the fog. Thick white meant freezing. Grey meant only miserable. Icicles dangled from gutters like glass chandeliers over cobblestones slick with frost. Yet despite this, people walked, to work, to market, to worship, their breath rising in clouds that blurred class and fortune alike. Architects, of course, wrote about symmetry and grace. But the true architecture of the time was improvisation. A curtain pinned tighter, a coat hung over a bedpost, a cat invited indoors. Warmth wasn't designed, it was invented daily. The houses stood proud, as did their people. They didn't curse the weather, they addressed it politely, as one might an uninvited guest who'd overstayed its welcome. And in that small civility, there was victory. The cold didn't care, but London endured anyway. And endurance has its own kind of elegance. When stone failed, cloth took over. To walk through a Victorian winter was to carry your home on your shoulders. Every layer was defense and declaration: cotton, flannel, wool, silk, leather, each holding a piece of someone's hope. Clothes rustled, swished, whispered. The city sounded like fabric breathing. Women mastered the art of insulation disguised as grace: petticoats, corsets, shawls, architecture sewn with patience. Some tucked warm bricks under skirts during carriage rides. Others wore gloves so tight they couldn't feel their fingers. Men favored wool coats that absorbed more soot than air. Scarves froze at the edges from their own breath, and hats carried the perfume of smoke long after fire. Tailors became philosophers. They spoke of seams and souls in the same sentence. Every fitting was half confession, half negotiation. How much could dignity conceal discomfort? Clothes were symbols of survival, of class, of stubborn pride. But no fabric ever lied completely. You could always spot the tremor of someone fighting the cold beneath the appearance of composure. The smell of wet wool became the scent of London itself. It clung to stairwells, omnibuses, church pews. It mingled with tobacco, coal, perfume, and hunger. It was the fragrance of persistence. And when people complained, they did so gently, as if to scold the weather would be unsporting. Children learned young to dress in silence, fingers numb as they tied boots. Mothers layered them like precious cargo, pressing kisses into scarves instead of promises. Clothes were heavy, but so was love. Even in death, fabric remained faithful. Coffins lined with linen, gloves folded beside still hands. The Victorians believed warmth followed you, if not in temperature, then in memory. They buried people with their coats, an unspoken prayer that somewhere beyond the frost, the wind would finally be kind. To them, clothing wasn't vanity, it was resilience you could wear. And in a city that punished vulnerability, that mattered more than beauty. When you looked out over a London crowd in winter, you didn't see individuals. You saw movement stitched into colour, a living quilt made from every act of endurance. The scent of bread and coal was the smell of London surviving itself. You could follow it down every street. Warm dough meeting cold soot, hope meeting hunger. At dawn, bakers opened their shutters first, their ovens roaring against the frost. Steam escaped like angels fleeing. The poor would hover nearby, hands outstretched toward invisible warmth, pretending that the smell alone could feed them. Sometimes it almost did. Coal arrived next, black, heavy, sacred. Men bent beneath its weight, their faces grey before noon. They shouted to one another through the fog, voices echoing between brick walls that had seen centuries of labour. A sack of coal could mean comfort, or just another week of debt. For some, it was traded like currency. For others, stolen like bread. Each lump held a piece of the earth's oldest memory, burning so that people could invent tomorrow. In the kitchens, heat became conversation. The clatter of pots, the whistle of kettles, the hiss of water meeting iron, all spoke a domestic language older than architecture. Housewives measured time not by clocks but by boiling. When the kettle hums twice, the children will wake, they'd say. It was science made intimate, survival turned into routine. Even in poverty, food had poetry. bread shared between neighbors, stew stretched thin but flavored with laughter. The poorer the meal, the longer the talk. You learn to eat slowly, to make the moment last. A family might gather around one pot, dipping spoons in rhythm, speaking softly as though not to startle the little they had. The wealthy dined in courses, soups, roasts, puddings, each dish a declaration of distance from suffering. Yet even in their houses, servants carried the memory of hunger from the kitchens to the parlours. Warmth, like wealth, never travelled evenly. You could taste the imbalance in the air. Outside, street vendors shouted into the fog, "Hot chestnuts! Roasted eels!" Their carts hissed and smoked, filling alleys with fragrance. People crowded around them, hands out, trading coins for heat disguised as food. No one cared what it tasted like. Warmth was flavor enough. And when night returned, when coal was gone and bellies quieted, families sat before dim fires and told stories. Tales of summer, of ships, of saints, anything that reminded them that life had once been easier to hold. Words, too, could feed. To survive a Victorian winter was to become fluent in gratitude, not for abundance, but for endurance. Cold teaches you how to exist. It rewrites the human form, reshaping movement, breathing, even thought. In London, winter sculpted its people, hands red and cracked, faces pale as candles, shoulders hunched as though bracing against invisible waves. You could tell the temperature by the colour of fingertips on the tram. The city was a gallery of frostbitten saints, each enduring quietly. Hygiene bent to weather's will. Baths were luxuries measured in courage, not soap. Water bit the skin like punishment. Many preferred perfume to purity, the scent of rosewater covering the smell of coal. In lower homes, cleanliness meant surviving the same shirt another week. They called it economy, but it was really surrender disguised as pride. Doctors blamed the fog for every ailment: consumption, pneumonia, melancholia. The fog, in turn, blamed the poor. And yet people persisted. Mothers rubbed goose fat on children's chests, believing it kept death polite. Fathers drank gin to numb the ache in bones. Remedies were half prayer, half stubbornness. Miracles were statistical errors. Still, the body found its rhythms. Fingers learned to move faster, feet to tread carefully over icy cobblestones. Couples walked arm in arm, less from affection than from balance. The body became compass, anchor, furnace. Motion itself was medicine. You moved, therefore you lived. At night, blankets stacked like fortresses. Some slept in hats, others in coats. Entire families shared beds, not out of intimacy, but strategy. The rhythm of breathing filled rooms otherwise silent. You could tell love by warmth, how much of it someone was willing to share. The cold erased vanity. Faces went unpainted, hair stiff from wind. Yet in the right light, gaslight, candlelight, there was beauty. A sheen of frost on lashes, a glow in the cheek from brisk air. Pain gave its own blush. The Victorians wrote poems about such things, calling it winter's honesty. Children adapted best. They skated on frozen puddles, chased smoke rings, made snowballs from soot. They didn't know resilience had a name. They only knew laughter melted faster than ice. And that, somehow, was enough. The body suffered, but the spirit that strange Victorian fuel, refused to break. Cold could harden muscle and slow blood, but it couldn't extinguish that small, human spark that kept moving forward. When night arrived, it did so like water filling a basin, slowly, then all at once. Streets vanished into fog. Windows glowed like distant stars. London became a galaxy built from gaslight and breath. Each lamp was a fragile universe of its own, hissing softly, holding back the dark one flame at a time. Inside homes, candles stood like sentinels. The air shimmered with their effort. Shadows stretched across faces, gentle and loyal. Families gathered close, reading aloud or mending socks, their movements punctuated by the rhythm of fire. The light was uneven, too bright near the wick, too soft at the edges, but it was human. Artificial sun, borrowed from earth. Light was work, too. Candles had to be trimmed, wicks recut, lamps refilled. The lamplighter outside climbed his ladder like a priest ascending to bless the street. He carried fire through the veins of the city, one flickering heartbeat at a time. And when morning came, he'd return to extinguish it, ending night's fragile covenant. For those who could afford it, evenings were gentle rituals. Piano notes drifted through drawing rooms, tea steamed beside novels, shadows danced across patterned walls. Yet even in luxury, darkness pressed against the glass. Every flame reminded them how temporary safety was. In poorer quarters, the glow was smaller but steadier. One candle, one family. They'd stretch its light as far as possible, reading, stitching, whispering, dreaming. Sometimes they let it burn too long, watching it consume itself completely. There was beauty in exhaustion, in a flame that gave everything. Light changed the texture of conversation. People spoke slower, as if time itself respected the flame. Lovers confessed beside its tremble. Children fell asleep mid-story, their faces haloed in gold. The night softened its edges, and beyond those rooms, London kept glowing, faint, fragile, but alive. From above, it must have looked like the earth remembering its own stars. For all their hardship, the Victorians never stopped lighting candles. It wasn't habit, it was defiance. To make light, even when darkness was cheaper. London's heartbeat didn't stop at night. It simply changed tempo. When the wealthy slept, the city's second shift took the stage. The lamplighters, milkmen, night watchmen, and bakers walked beneath the fog, their lanterns swaying like moving stars. The cobblestones glistened, slick from mist and horse hooves. The only sound was rhythm. Boot, wheel, breath, whisper. Each man carried light or labor, and sometimes both. The lamplighter moved first, tall pole in hand, touching flame to glass with reverence. You could hear the hiss, the quiet birth of fire. He didn't look back to see the glow, he trusted it. Behind him, the baker unlocked his door, the heat of his oven blooming into the cold. The two men never spoke, but their routines rhymed. One lighting streets, the other lighting hope. Night workers lived between worlds. Too late for the living, too early for the dead. They knew the smell of fog better than any poet, and the silence between bells better than priests. They were invisible but essential, the quiet gears that turned civilization while others dreamed. A policeman might stroll by, his footsteps hollow and steady. He'd nod to a watchman, both acknowledging the absurd bravery of being awake. In the distance, a clock struck 3, its chime dissolving into mist. Time was elastic here. It stretched and sagged, measured not in hours but in tasks completed before dawn. The city they served barely noticed them, yet every lamp that burned, every loaf that rose, every safe street, all whispered their names. Their reward was anonymity. Their purpose was continuity. Gaslight shimmered against frost, making the night look warmer than it was. The lamplighter glanced once more at his work, a row of halos burning softly through the fog, and then vanished down an alley. He'd return at sunrise to undo it all. That, too, was part of the job, to make light and then take it back. In those hours, London belonged to the quiet. The air smelled of yeast and coal, of breath and waiting. Somewhere, a cat brushed against a milk pail, and the world felt small enough to fit in your hands. The city wasn't sleeping. It was surviving in its gentlest form. Morning began with sound, a chorus of wooden wheels, barking traders, and the slap of canvas pulled back from stalls. The fog had thinned, but the cold had not. You could hear breath before you saw faces. The market was awake. Fishmongers shouted prices, their fingers blue, their aprons stiff with ice. Women bargained with voices, half laughter, half defiance. Apples glowed like embers on the tables, cabbages steamed faintly from frost. Everything looked alive, even in struggle. The air smelled of brine and bread, of hope disguised as commerce. Children darted between stalls, carrying baskets too large for them, shouting errands for a few pennies. Their cheeks burned pink, and their eyes reflected every flame they passed. A boy slipped, laughed, and kept running. Laughter, in that weather, was proof of immortality. The poor came early before the good produce was gone. They huddled near bakers' doors, waiting for crusts that cost less after sunrise. Some vendors looked away when they took too much. Others pretended not to see. Kindness was often silent here, a nod, a glance, a smaller coin. As daylight rose, the frost began to glitter. You could almost mistake it for beauty. A vendor held out a fish so fresh, its scales caught the light like glass. "Still breathing," he said, half joking. The customer smiled, knowing it wasn't true. Lies were currency, too, little acts of warmth, traded against reality. By noon, the noise became music. Cartwheels creaked, coins clinked, gulls screamed overhead. It was the sound of hunger organizing itself. The market didn't care for poetry, but it created it anyway. When snow began to fall again, the traders didn't stop. They simply lifted their collars and carried on. Commerce, after all, was its own kind of prayer. And through the fog and shouting, one truth lingered: the city was built on movement. Even the cold couldn't make people still. Every warm room had a secret, someone else's frozen hands. Servants lit the world for others, rising before dawn to kindle fires that would never warm them. Their footsteps echoed through empty halls, carrying buckets of coal heavier than wages. They moved like ghosts, silent but indispensable. A maid's morning began in darkness. She'd kneel before the hearth, fingers numb, coaxing the embers with scraps of kindling. Sparks flared against her face, tiny suns reflected in tired eyes. She'd wait until the flame caught, then move on to the next room. Dozens of fires before breakfast, no applause, just heat for someone else's comfort. In kitchens, cooks stirred pots as frost bloomed on the windows. Steam mixed with the smell of onions, meat, and soap. Scullery boys polished pans until they could see themselves, reflections distorted by grease and fatigue. The warmth around them was ironic, so close yet unreachable. Upstairs, the wealthy slept beneath velvet blankets. Their dreams were kept alive by labor they never saw. When they rose, the fires already blazed, the tea already steeped. They'd sigh contentedly and call it civility. But downstairs, the servants knew the truth, that civility was built on invisible effort. Some found humor in it. A housemaid once wrote in her diary, "We light the master's fires, and they think the sun obeys them." She wasn't bitter, only observant. The poor didn't resent work, they resented invisibility. Still, there was pride in competence. A well-tended fire was an unspoken signature. The way it burned told a story. Steady flame, clean grate, no smoke. The servants competed quietly, each flame a small act of craftsmanship. When night came, they rested by smaller fires or none at all. Yet they smiled, because warmth, even borrowed warmth, was proof of survival. The city glowed with thousands of such unseen victories. Every flicker of light was someone's labor made visible. They called them mudlarks, sweeps, newsies, and urchins. London's smallest citizens, barefoot, sleepless, unstoppable. The streets raised them like indifferent parents. They lived where heat leaked, where light spilled. They knew every doorway and every drainpipe, every bakery that left its shutters cracked for smell alone. At dawn, they ran messages, sold papers, polished boots. They were quick, clever, and loud, little flames that refused to die. Coal dust streaked their cheeks like war paint. Hunger taught them to smile when they should have cried. They slept in pairs for warmth, under carts, inside stairwells, sometimes beside stray dogs who understood the same economics of survival. Their laughter was sharp, their eyes sharper. If you offered them bread, they'd joke first, as if generosity was a trick. Winter was cruelest to them, but they never admitted it. They slid on ice, stole apples, raced the lamplighter home. They invented games out of misery, and for a few moments, misery forgot itself. Occasionally, charity found them. A missionary with soup, a constable with pity, a stranger with coin. But help was fleeting, cold was permanent. They learned to trust fire more than people. Still, they had faith of their own kind. They believed in morning, because it always came, no matter how long the night. They believed in laughter, because it burned longer than coal. And they believed in each other, fiercely, because no one else would. In the quiet before dawn, if you passed an alley and heard giggling, it wasn't ghosts. It was London's heartbeat, small, fragile, and astonishingly alive. These children were proof that resilience doesn't need permission. For the wealthy, winter was a backdrop, something decorative, like snow in a painting. Inside their grand houses, the fires burned with orchestral precision. Servants fed coals in silence, their shadows dancing on marble walls. Guests arrived in carriages that steamed like beasts, shaking frost from their gloves before stepping into rooms that smelled of claret, pine, and perfume. To them, warmth wasn't survival, it was performance. Drawing rooms glowed with gaslight and laughter. Men in tailored coats argued about politics. Women fanned themselves by the fire, complaining it was too warm. The absurdity went unnoticed, that outside, the same frost they romanticized was killing the poor. Luxury made people poetic. Someone would quote Byron while another adjusted the poker, and the conversation would drift like smoke, elegant, meaningless, endless. But even here, the cold found its way in. The frost drew delicate veins on window glass, the same beauty found in a pauper's breath. Servants knew which rooms to avoid, the ones where draughts whispered louder than gossip. Every house, no matter how rich, had its brittle corners, its unlit truths. The rich treated winter as theatre. They painted scenes of ice skaters, attended balls where snow was imported for effect, toasted to the chill of the season as if it were a beloved guest. The cold became metaphor, something that happened to other people. They called it picturesque, yet comfort carried guilt like smoke. Many quietly donated coal to parishes, hoping charity could warm the conscience. Others wrote checks they'd never sign, feeling noble simply for considering generosity. The fire might have burned brighter, but it still cast shadows. Sometimes, when the music faded and the last guest left, a hostess would pause by the hearth, staring into the coals. The silence after laughter always sounded too large. The fire crackled, but it didn't answer. And in that flicker, she might remember, warmth is never free. Beyond the frost-glazed windows, the city sighed. The same snow fell on marble and mud alike, equal in its indifference. The difference wasn't in what people felt, but in what they could afford to forget. Before the people stirred, the animals were already awake. Horses clopped through the slush, pulling carts heavy with milk, coal, or silence. Their breath billowed in plumes that looked like ghosts escaping. Dogs trotted beside them, fur matted with soot, tails curling against the cold. Even the pigeons, grey, unbothered, huddled near chimneys, their coos soft as prayer. London was full of creatures that didn't belong anywhere else. Cats ruled the alleys, silent monarchs patrolling between crates and shadows. They knew where the baker dropped crumbs, where the fishmonger left scraps. They were the city's truest survivors, agile, proud, invisible. Horses, though, bore the hardest burden. Their hooves cracked on frozen cobblestones, their harnesses creaked with every breath. Carriage drivers wrapped them in blankets that smelled of rain and exhaustion. The city moved because they did. Their suffering was as rhythmic as the sound of wheels. In the mornings, stables were filled with fog and steam, the smell of hay mixing with sweat and manure. Boys worked with brushes, murmuring to the animals as if apology could soften labor. Some horses had names, most didn't. Yet each one recognized the sound of a kind hand. A voice, a whistle, a piece of sugar hidden in a pocket. Birds found their faith in rooftops. Sparrows nested in gutters, singing short, stubborn songs. Crows circled the Thames, scavenging, waiting. The river fed everything that lived, man, beast, and myth. Even rats, despised but indomitable, scurried like little kings beneath the city's boots. The Victorians often wrote about animals with pity and admiration mixed. They saw in them the same endurance they praised in themselves. The dog by the fire, the horse in the snow, the cat in the market. Each reflected a different class of human struggle. Nature had its own social order, and it was cruelly familiar. At night, the city belonged to them. Cats slipped through broken shutters, dogs slept by embers, horses dozed in narrow stalls. You could hear it if you listened, the quiet murmur of creatures dreaming beside human walls. And in their breath, the city exhaled. Fire had 1,000 personalities in Victorian London. In mansions, it purred politely behind polished grates. In taverns, it roared, laughing with drunks and sailors. In tenements, it whispered, a fragile thing made of scraps and faith. Each flame told a story about the people who fed it. Public houses glowed like sanctuaries, their windows fogged from laughter, from bodies pressed close for warmth. Beer steamed, voices slurred, songs stumbled into beauty. The poor came not for drink alone, but for belonging, for heat, for sound, for the illusion that life was still generous. The fire was the room's center, a democratic sun. Rich and poor could share it without apology. A woman might dry her gloves beside a dock worker's hands, neither pretending not to notice the other. For a few hours, class melted. So did grief. Outside, the streets glittered wet with reflection. A man might pause, peering in through the tavern glass, his face ghosted by firelight. He'd watch the silhouettes move and smile, not jealous, just reminded that joy still existed somewhere. Then he'd walk on. In homes, families gathered around their smaller flames, telling stories. Old myths about saints, sailors, and ghosts. Fire was both warmth and witness. It didn't judge the tale, it illuminated it. Even the lonely found comfort in the act of watching it. To stare into flame was to remember motion. The way it danced, changed color, consumed, all without regret. Fire didn't fear the dark. It defined it. When the night deepened and the lamps outside hissed their last breath, fires dimmed too, becoming embers. That last glow before sleep was sacred, a promise to the morning. And though no one said it aloud, everyone knew, as long as a single fire still burned, London hadn't surrendered. Churches in winter felt older than time. The stone walls held cold like memory, and the pews creaked beneath layers of wool and prayer. Breath rose like incense, mixing with candle smoke. The organ groaned, and the hymns echoed from throat to frost, trembling but undefeated. People still came, every Sunday, every storm. They walked miles through fog to kneel before flickering candles. Faith wasn't luxury, it was insulation. Inside, sermons became lullabies, steady and slow, spoken more for comfort than conversion. Priests' hands shook as they lifted the chalice. Children shivered under coats too thin for ceremony. Outside, icicles hung from the church eaves like crystal bells. The sound of the real ones, dull, heavy, faithful, carried through the air, calling everyone equal for an hour. The rich sat in the front pews, furs brushing against prayer books. The poor stood in the back, hats in hand, faces numb but reverent. The fire near the altar wasn't big enough to warm them all, but its light was democratic. It fell on every face the same. After the service, people lingered by the door. They spoke softly, exchanged bread, gossip, and comfort. The church was more than belief, it was shelter. And in those moments, religion didn't need miracles. It just needed warmth. At night, when the doors closed and the candles went out, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was gentle, like a pause between heartbeats. Somewhere inside that stone, the hymns still echoed. Faith, in winter, wasn't loud. It whispered, shivered, endured, and maybe that's what made it holy. When the day ended, London didn't rest. It faded. The fog rose again, swallowing corners, reshaping streets. The lamplighters returned, retracing their morning routes to snuff the flames one by one. Each extinguished lamp felt like a sigh, a curtain closing. People walked home slower in winter, not from fatigue, but from caution. The stones were slick, the alleys narrow, the dark full of imagination. The only company was the echo of footsteps, yours and someone else's, though you couldn't tell whose. Some carried lanterns, their circles of light, small but loyal. Others trusted memory, moving through the dark by instinct. Lovers shared scarves, their laughter making fog of its own. Solitary men clutched papers close to their chest, as if the warmth of the story inside could reach their hand. Shop windows glowed faintly, yellow squares of life in a grey maze. You could glimpse silhouettes within. A woman sewing, a man pouring ale, a child chasing shadows. Each scene was a fragment of hope framed by glass. Crossing bridges, people paused to watch the river breathe steam. The Thames reflected what the sky hid, faint stars trembling like promises. The sound of the water was slow and deep, as if time itself were thawing. Every walk home in winter was pilgrimage, small, necessary, sacred. You reached your door not just colder, but wiser. Survival sharpened gratitude. Even the poorest Londoner, entering a room with the smallest flame, knew something the rich forgot: that warmth is best when earned. And somewhere in the distance, as you locked the door behind you, another bell rang. The city, weary but awake, whispered, "Good night." By December, even the misery glittered. The soot on rooftops sparkled under snow. Coal dust turned festive beneath gaslight. London looked almost kind. The markets hung garlands of evergreen, and bakers dusted loaves with sugar that looked like frost. For a few weeks, hardship dressed up as celebration. Carols echoed through narrow streets, off-key, sincere, unstoppable. Children sang for coins, their voices trembling but bright. Families gathered in rooms that smelled of orange peel and smoke. The poorest wrapped candles in paper to make them last longer. Every flame mattered. The wealthy threw parties that mimicked warmth but couldn't match it. Roasts, wine, laughter. Yet even there, the cold lingered near the windows. Charity became fashionable. Coal drives filled wagons. Gifts trickled to the tenements. Guilt, when wrapped in ribbon, looked almost noble. Church bells rang across the river, their sound softened by snow. The notes carried through fog, over rooftops, into every heart that needed them. For once, the city seemed united, not by equality, but by awe. Children left footprints in slush, drawing angels with mittened hands. Bakers handed out crusts to strangers. Even lamplighters paused to watch the glow of 1,000 candles flickering in windows like stars. For a moment, it didn't matter who was warm and who wasn't. The city, breathing in unison, felt human again. When midnight came, the frost shimmered under the full moon, and silence fell, not emptiness, but peace. And in that quiet hour, even London, vast, weary, magnificent, seemed to smile. You smell soap, steam, and damp wood long before you see the laundry room, a clouded cave where winter is briefly banished by boiling water. Seamstresses bend over needles that glint like tiny swords. Laundresses wring sheets until their arms shine with effort. The sound is constant, splash, scrape, sigh. This was women's winter labor, invisible, relentless, essential. It mattered because clean linen meant health and dignity when everything else felt dirty. Think of it as the era's quiet public service. No headlines, just a city stitched and scrubbed into decency. You'll notice how the heat here is temporary. Step away and the cold reclaims you as if offended. In top-floor attics, the air tastes of starch and candle smoke. Seamstresses stitch for women they will never meet, turning exhaustion into elegance one hem at a time. They called it piecework, as if each piece didn't also take a piece of them. Why it mattered, clothes outlived their makers, and fashion became a kind of social armor against winter's judgment. Modern comparison. It's like editing photos you'll never be tagged in, perfecting a life that isn't yours. You won't forget the way the window frost patterns their world into lace they didn't ask for. Governesses move through quieter rooms that smell of beeswax and library dust. Their winters are polite, but cold in newer ways, the kind you feel in the pauses between phrases. They teach by the fire they do not command, steadying small hands over slates and ink. What it meant, they carried warmth in voice and ritual, where hearths could not reach. Imagine moderating a group chat where no one remembers your birthday. Necessary, thanked, and somehow still alone. You sense how their patience keeps the house from icing over on the inside. Downstairs, housemaids learn the choreography of speed and silence. They shake out rugs that exhale dust like ancient history, fetch coal that leaves crescents under their nails, and polish brass until it reflects faces that rarely look down. It mattered because grandeur requires friction. Shine is heat made visible. It's the same logic as a spotless dashboard in a car you'll never drive. The brass never says thank you, but it gleams a little warmer when someone needs to feel proud. In alleys, flower sellers stand with fingers gone red, breath turning petals brittle in seconds. Violets, holly, evergreen, Colour smuggled into a monochrome city. Why it mattered? A coin for blooms was a coin for supper, but also a rebellion against grey. Dry humour aside, it's like paying for a screensaver when your computer barely boots. Small beauty proves the machine still lives. You remember their voices. Soft, insistent, oddly musical in fog. Widows run tiny empires of survival from single rooms, taking in mending, letting out beds, brewing tea that tastes faintly of regret and resilience. They fold heat into kettles as if it were currency. It mattered because single women held together blocks of streets with credit, kindness, and perfectly kept ledgers. Picture a community manager without Wi-Fi, maintaining trust one cup at a time. The room looks humble, but it conducts warmth like good copper. Factory girls navigate air that stings with match phosphorus or spinning room lint. Some tie scarves across mouths. Some simply adjust to breathing difficulty like a personality trait. Why it mattered? They became collateral for everyone else's comfort. Matches for fires, cloth for coats, thread for homes that never noticed their fingerprints. Imagine labeling all your files MISC and watching them hold a company together anyway. You notice their humor, dry, quick, a flame that refuses instructions. At night, these women return to smaller fires, sharing socks, stories, and soup. The heat here isn't loud, it's unanimous. It matters because winter breaks alone but bends in company. Think of it as crowd-sourced warmth with no platform fee. You hear the soft clatter of spoons and realize the city's bravest work is done when no one writes plaques. The hallway smells of camphor, wax, and damp wool. The scent of hope diluted. A doctor removes his gloves, cheeks raw from wind, eyes bright with too little sleep. He listens to chests that rattle like shutters. He prescribes rest in rooms that shiver. Why it mattered? Winter was an accomplice to disease, and medicine was a negotiation with drafts. Imagine updating software on a machine that hates electricity. You'll hear the clink of bottles and the careful way he says, "Keep the window ajar," as if arguing with weather itself. Chemist shops glow like miniature cathedrals. Rows of glass in amber, cobalt, emerald, laudanum, quinine, tinctures with names that sound confident enough to work. Mothers trade coins for the possibility of mourning. It mattered because chemistry gave shape to wishful thinking just long enough for bodies to catch up. Think of it as placebo with a decent chance at honesty. You notice how even the labels look warm, slanted handwriting promising order in a city of fog. Poorer rooms invent their own pharmacopoeia, mustard poultices, onion syrup, goose fat massaged onto wheezing chests. The smell is stubborn, domestic, weirdly comforting. Why it mattered? Remedies organize fear. Rituals are thermostats for panic. Dry modern parallel. Turning your router off and on because it once helped. You register the kindness in these cures. Half superstition, half science, entirely love. Hospitals, wards where breath becomes weather. Sheets stiffen near windows, nurses move like lit candles, small flames with steady hands. It mattered because compassion altered outcomes even when medicine couldn't. Imagine a service whose main feature is presence. You hear the patience in every there, now, and how it warms the room by a degree that no chart can record. Among the wealthy, illness acquires etiquette. Pale becomes poetic, coughing almost fashionable. Portraits flatter fevers into luminance. Why it mattered. Beauty made suffering negotiable in parlors where reality felt rude. It's the equivalent of applying a filter to the flu, not helpful, but it calms the host. You sense the cost. Delayed honesty always collects interest. Then the quacks. Traveling miracles in green glass. Electric elixirs. Winter tonics. The confident theatre of a man who never inoculated a conscience. Still, sometimes people slept because the bottles said they could. It mattered because rest is medicine wearing a disguise. Think of it as the placebo you choose because your bones demanded a story. In the end, recovery arrives like better weather. Slowly, then suddenly. The cough softens. Color returns. Appetite remembers itself. Why it mattered. Endurance needed proof. Dry smile. Bodies are stubborn apartments, drafty, but still rentable. You hear a kettle sing and realize the first true cure is being able to taste tea again. And when the fever breaks, the doctor leaves without ceremony, boots squeaking apology on cold floors. The room is warmer now, but not because of coal. It learned your name and decided to keep you. A single candle paints a small republic of light on a desk scarred by other winters. Ink thickens in the bottle, reluctant to flow. Your hand warms it, and the sentence remembers how to begin. Why it mattered. Letters made warmth portable, folding breath into paper. Think of them as long-distance radiators powered by patience. You hear the nib scratch like soft snow on glass. Ink misbehaves in cold. It sulks, it clots, it stains. Writers hold bottles near flames, a choreography of caution and hope. Seals crack if rushed. Envelopes drink steam if coaxed. It mattered because care is a temperature. Detail keeps feeling alive long enough to travel. Dry comparison, exporting emotion in a format that hates compression. You notice how mistakes look tender under candlelight. Stationery divides the city, crests and vellum for some, ledger scraps and butcher paper for others. The surprising truth, the heart ignores watermark. Why it mattered? Message outruns medium when the night is long. It's like hearing a love song through a cheap speaker and crying anyway. You feel how a page can heat a pocket on the walk home. People carry letters against the body, reread them until folds become veins. A widow sleeps with 2 lines under her pillow. A boy counts days by post. It mattered because attention is warmth dressed as ink. Dry humor, receipts never got this kind of devotion. You taste the salt of a thumbprint where someone paused too long. Postmen are winter saints with bags that smell of glue and rain. They knock. Doors open faster than manners. Why it mattered. News is a thermostat for the soul. Modern parallel. That one notification you pray for, delivered by boots instead of bites. You hear gratitude spoken like a full name. Some letters never leave the desk. Unsent drafts to the dead, to the almost, to the person you were. They burn later, and the room sighs sweeter. Why it mattered? Confession is heat even if the world never reads it. Think of it as installing forgiveness locally. You notice how ash settles like punctuation where words refuse to go. Diaries keep the quieter warmth. Frost noted, hunger counted, a candle praised by date. These are the city's true weather reports. Personal, precise, unembellished. It mattered because memory is insulation against the next storm. Dry aside, analytics before analytics, measured in adjectives. You hear a page turn and the room agree. And when the candle gutters, the last line holds the heat for a moment longer. You blow gently. Darkness closes like a well-made book. The letter waits by the door, already warming someone you'll never meet. The platform smells of iron, oil, and the brief heaven of boiler heat. Steam climbs into the night like a white cathedral in motion. A whistle slices the fog. Not music, but leadership. Why it mattered. Railways stitched warmth across distance. Moving coal, bread, and good news faster than winter could argue. Think of it as the internet with wheels. Profoundly physical. You feel the platform hum under your boots as if the century were breathing. Carriages play tricks with temperature, a furnace near the engine, a polar expedition at the rear. Windows frost into lace, passengers rub circles to see the world rushing as ink on slate. It mattered because motion became anesthesia. The clatter, a lullaby that filed down worry. Modern parallel, white noise with consequences. You recognize the miracle, seats carrying strangers toward mornings they haven't earned yet. Mail trains run like arteries under moonlight, sacks thumping like careful hearts. Love moves at 40 miles an hour, officially posted. Why it mattered. Letters arrive before doubt decays them. Dry grin. Tomorrow's tears sorted efficiently by men who don't read them. You hear canvas slap, iron answer, destiny bagged. Small stations hold a holiness of pause. One lamp, one porter, stamping heat back into feet. One signalman with a private dictionary of fog. It mattered because progress respects stillness to stay honest. Think of it as a heartbeat holding its breath between beats. You watch a light approach, tiny, then undeniable, then everything. Accidents happen, rails glassed with ice, signals that catch colds. Newspapers phrase it as a lamentable occurrence, smoothing tragedy into typography. Why it mattered. Scale invents forgetfulness unless someone keeps reading names aloud. Dry truth. Speed bills, joy and grief at the same desk. You feel the night grow heavier and then decide to keep moving. The countryside appears in glimpses, hedges sugared with frost, a cottage window like a portable star, an owl negotiating darkness expertly. It mattered because travel taught even the tired to notice beauty they couldn't own. Modern echo, cinematography, for people who only purchased a ticket. You rest your head and let the world turn pages for you. Back in the city, rails sing beneath bridges. The Thames receives reflected steam like smudged moonlight. Workers step down with faces shining from heat, then seize the cold like a rope. It mattered because winter could be outrun for a few minutes at a time. Sometimes that's enough. Dry remark, momentum as central heating. And when dawn arrives, the station smells of baked bread from somewhere you can't see. The timetable clicks. The day decides itself. You realize the train was a moving hearth, and you were warmed by the idea of elsewhere. The corridor tastes of lime wash and thin tea. Boots echo. Rules echo louder. beds line up like obedient tombs. Why it mattered. The poorhouse turned charity into architecture, comfort into lesson. Think of it as austerity with a roof. You feel the temperature of dignity just above freezing. Families arrive together and are separated by policy, not cruelty, which can feel the same. Men to one ward, women to another, children to a third, where lullabies learn to whisper. It mattered because survival demanded order, even when order bruised the heart. Dry aside. Bureaucracy is winter with paperwork. You watch a mother trace a name in window frost and not wipe it away. Meals clatter into the hall. Oats, bread, a concept of soup. Steam does most of the comforting. Why it mattered? Hot is a flavor you can believe in. Modern echo, a status bar that reaches 80% and decides that's sufficient. You hear spoons as small bells, ringing proof that people are still here. Work fills the day, picking oakum, scrubbing floors, breaking stones that won't remember you. It mattered because labor is cheaper than hope and easier to audit. Dry humor the residents use between themselves. We're warming the empire, one rope fiber at a time. You catch the smile that survives discipline. Kindness leaks. A nurse tucks an extra blanket. A cook looks away when seconds happen. A child shares crust like contraband sun. It mattered because warmth escapes. Physics and mercy agree. Think of it as an underground spring in a building designed for drought. You learn to follow the sound of soft voices to locate it. Death comes quietly and early here, entered in ledgers with names spelled as guesses. The bed is emptied, the sheet replaced, the statistic correct. Why it mattered. Remembrance requires effort nobody is paid for. Dry truth. Winter loves places where applause is forbidden. You stand longer than you should beside the fresh pillow, and yet some leave in spring, blinking, thinner, astonishingly alive. They step into streets that smell of bread and smoke and unowned futures. It mattered because even engineered despair can't outdesign desire. You note the angle of their shoulders, not proud, just possible. The poorhouse remains, a lesson written in stone that people keep misreading. But the city hums outside with markets and bells and accidents of kindness, and somehow that hum gets in. Before the streets speak, the river clears its throat, a long, low sound under fog. You smell salt, tar, and the metallic breath of winter water. Barges move like patient animals. Gulls write hieroglyphs in the mist. Why it mattered? The Thames was London's slow furnace, bringing coal in and hunger out. Think of it as the city's bloodstream with a cold. You watch the surface wrinkle as if thinking, wharves creak, ropes hum, and men shout names you never hear clearly. Cargo, tide, warnings. Frost beads on railings. Boots leave signatures that the river swallows as a matter of policy. It mattered because commerce doesn't care about comfort. It cares about arrival. Dry smile. Deadlines existed before calendars got smug. You feel the dock planks answer each step like old friends. Under bridges, the water carries reflections of lamps, stretching them into tired gold. Smoke drifts low, turning the air into something you can almost fold. It mattered because visibility is optional when duty isn't. Modern comparison, driving by instrument. Only the instruments are hands, rope, and refusal to quit. You measure distance by curses. Mudlarks appear at low tide, children with pockets full of nails, coins, and miraculous trash. They treat the riverbed like a thrift store that resents them. Why it mattered. Poverty mined the gaps between tides, turning refuse into rent. Dry joke you overhear. The Thames is generous if you're patient and waterproof. You see a girl lift a spoon as if it were silver, which, to be fair, it is if you squint. Ice never fully claims the Thames, but it tries. A skin that cracks, reforms, apologizes, repeats. Ferrymen test it with poles, their breath counting time. It mattered because failure would be theatrical and immediate. Think of it as the city's refusal to hold still long enough to die. You listen to the river argue softly with itself. Factories squat along the banks, chimneys knitting grey scarves for the sky. The water accepts what it must and delivers what it can. It mattered because industry and appetite shared one mirror. Dry aside. When the tea tastes of ship, you call it character. You accept that survival includes strange flavours. At night, the Thames reflects constellations built by human hands, lines of gaslight floating like a handwriting sample from the century. It mattered because beauty sneaks into efficiency when no one guards the door. You lean on the parapet and let your face warm against stone that has heard every oath and every forgiveness. And when morning finally bruises the fog with pale blue, the river looks back, indifferent but reliable. You realize London's warmth was never only in rooms, it was also in roots. The practiced paths of coal, bread, letters, and stubbornness moving through cold like blood in a giant, imperfect heart. The gardens of London never truly slept. They only slowed their breathing. In winter, you could hear them, the soft crackle of frost spreading through grass, the sigh of branches under snow. The air smelled of iron and distant smoke. A gardener's boot crushed ice like brittle sugar as he walked among statues wearing white cloaks. It mattered because even silence needs tending. Think of it as curating stillness, pruning the absence of sound. The soil was stiff but honest. It never lied about effort. Public parks became museums of cold. Benches stood empty, ponds glassed over. Swans carved paths through slush with the same arrogance they showed in summer. Children pressed their faces to the frozen surface, imagining kingdoms below. Why it mattered, even under ice, imagination kept moving. Dry remark. The human mind has better central heating than most homes. You notice how the fog wraps the trees like a blanket that's forgotten its job. Gardeners kept working, pruning, sweeping, coaxing green from grey. Their hands cracked, but their rhythm never faltered. They spoke little, their breath visible proof of persistence. Why it mattered, tending what appears dead, is an act of faith. Modern comparison. Replying to emails from projects that will never happen, but still hitting send. You respect the ritual even more than the result. In the great estates, hothouses glowed like secret suns. Glass panes fogged with condensation, orchids thrived while snow buried the world outside. The rich strolled among tropical leaves, pretending not to notice the absurdity. It mattered because control feels warmer than gratitude, dry smile, microclimate as moral philosophy. The servants wiped condensation with rags, creating brief windows into paradise. Poorer families nurtured small miracles on windowsills. Pots of thyme, a stubborn geranium, a sprig of ivy that refused obedience. These were the gardens of survival, fragrant, fragile, defiant. It mattered because life that refuses to die becomes theology. Think of it as grassroots prayer with chlorophyll. You sense hope in every cracked pot. Cemeteries, too, grew peaceful under frost. Stone angels wore shawls of snow. Footprints ended at gates and nowhere else. The cold didn't mock the dead, it equalized them. Why it mattered, quiet is the one luxury everyone eventually affords. Dry humor aside, even grief benefits from good lighting. You watch a crow land on a cross and call it balance. When Thor came, the ground sighed like someone waking from a long dream. The first green blade split the white crust, fragile and arrogant. It mattered because victory is often invisible until it isn't. Think of it as the earth's soft applause. And as evening fell again, the smell of wet soil returned, that ancient perfume of promise and persistence. The garden kept its secrets, but you could tell it was smiling. The first thing you notice is steam, thick, living, forgiving. It rolls from the doors of the public bathhouse like a rumor of paradise. Inside, the air hums with human sound, splashing, sighing, gossip rising with vapor. It smells of soap, lime, and survival. Why it mattered? Warmth here was communal, democratic. Think of it as a subscription to decency, paid weekly in pennies. You feel your pores remember gratitude. People came not just to wash, but to thaw. Men shrugged off the week like coats. Women carried laughter folded into towels. The poor joked that they visited to borrow the tropics for an hour. It mattered because dignity required temperature. Dry comparison. Logging into comfort just long enough to remember your password. The echoes of dripping water sound like applause for the living. Bath attendants kept the peace with soft voices and iron rules. No fighting, no loitering, no singing, yet songs still happened in whispers. Children giggled at bubbles, mothers scolded and smiled in the same breath. It mattered because community thrives best when unplanned. Modern echo, small talk as self-defense. You watch steam blur the class divide into temporary equality. For many, this was their only luxury, the sensation of warmth earned, not gifted. Men left with faces glowing, women with hair pinned up like saints of cleanliness. The city outside felt colder after, but that contrast was part of the pleasure. Why it mattered? We measure joy by the chill that follows. Dry aside. Even comfort needs an antagonist. You see their breath sparkle as they step back into the street. Bathhouses doubled as confessionals. People talked here, truth rising like steam. A widow whispered about rent, a young man about love, an old one about memories that smelled of coal. The walls heard everything and told no one. It mattered because shared vulnerability heats faster than water. You learn that transparency, literal or emotional, always fogs the mirrors. Workers drained and scrubbed the tubs at night, humming softly to themselves. The silence afterward was deeper than prayer. Buckets clanged, brooms hissed, steam faded. It mattered because even paradise needs janitors. Dry humor. heaven outsourced maintenance early, you admire their invisible grace. The next morning, the bathhouse would breathe again, steam rebuilding its theology. People would come, strip down, and step back into being human. It mattered because warmth repeats, forgiveness renews, and skin remembers. Think of it as the city's heartbeat made of vapor. And when you walk away, your clothes cling damply, but your soul feels lighter, rinsed, reset, realigned with the idea of mercy. Every fireplace was a stage. Flames cast light across faces, turning ordinary talk into theatre. You could smell wood resin, hear the crackle of punctuation. The fire invited honesty, not through demand, but through warmth. Why it mattered. Conversation flows better at 60 degrees Fahrenheit and rising. Think of it as the first social network powered by combustion. You sense the intimacy of flickering truth. In parlors, families gathered, some with fine china, others with chipped mugs. But the rhythm was the same. Someone stirred embers. Someone told a story. Jokes aged well here. So did forgiveness. It mattered because laughter reheats the air faster than coal. Dry remark, humor is renewable energy. You watch smoke drift up the chimney like a sigh that finally learned direction. Lovers spoke slower beside flame. Words felt heavier, melting in mid-air. A promise sounded sincere by candlelight that might sound foolish by noon. Why it mattered, heat blurs caution. Modern echo. Texting at 2 a.m. because the glow feels like connection. You feel the softness of mistakes warming the room. Friends debated politics and poetry until logs collapsed into embers. The poor discussed weather, the rich discussed art. Both discussed endurance. It mattered because disagreement kept minds warm. Dry smile, argument as central heating. You noticed the respect in pauses. Grandparents told stories of winters past, harsher, nobler, always with better morals. The children half listened, half dreamed. It mattered because repetition is comfort disguised as instruction. Modern aside, nostalgia is the coziest blanket. You hear their voices sinking with the crackle. Fireplaces remembered everything: the tears, the laughter, the arguments that ended in silence. The soot held archives of every emotion ever permitted indoors. It mattered because memory needs somewhere to sit. Dry humor, data storage before data existed. You see how the fire flickers when someone lies. As nights deepened, the conversations slowed. The room became pulse and breath. Words gave way to glances, then to quiet. Why it mattered. Silence after warmth is never empty. It's digestion. Think of it as emotional afterglow. The embers blink in approval, and when the last flame folds into itself, someone always whispers, "Good night," as if speaking to the room, the past, and the cold waiting outside. High above the roofs, the church bells froze in place, great bronze throats silenced by ice. The ropes below stiffened like old veins, refusing to move. The air tasted of metal and snow. It mattered because time itself seemed paused. Think of it as God hitting snooze on history. The city held its breath, waiting for sound. Bell ringers came with lanterns, their breath silver ribbons in the stairwell. They struck the sides gently, listening for complaint. Sometimes a note escaped, low, cracked, beautiful in its imperfection. Why it mattered. Broken music still marks the hour. Dry comparison. A playlist buffering in heaven. You feel the echo vibrate through your ribs. In villages, farmers used hammers to free smaller bells from ice, laughing as the tone wobbled back into tune. The cold turned sacred duty into farce. It mattered because worship should occasionally stumble. Humor, after all, is the most human form of prayer. You picture the sound traveling unevenly across fields, sincere despite its limp. For city dwellers, silence was louder. They looked up, expecting the noon chime, finding only wind. People adjusted instinctively. Work slowed, footsteps softened. Without bells, the day had no skeleton. Why it mattered, rhythm organizes courage. Dry aside, productivity metrics have always hated weather. You admire how absence becomes teacher. When thaw came, the first clear peal cracked the sky open. Pigeons scattered, dogs barked, and someone laughed simply because something still worked. It mattered because continuity is the most underrated miracle. Think of it as a reboot made audible. You catch yourself smiling at metal rediscovering its voice. The bells rang harder that day, as if rehearsing for all the silences they'd missed. Each note lingered in the frost, ringing longer than usual, generous in echo. It mattered because endurance, when successful, loves to sing. Dry humor, the cold finally paid its rent in acoustics. People stopped in the streets, hats in hand, eyes wet not from weather, but from recognition. Sound had returned like an old friend. The air trembled with gratitude. And somewhere between toll and echo, the city remembered. Warmth isn't just fire. It's also sound that refuses to quit. Before light, there is always breath. The city exhales a silver mist, roofs glitter with frost, and the river murmurs beneath a thin crust of ice. You can smell the world thawing, iron, smoke, wet stone. Chimneys stretch like tired arms into a pale sky, releasing sighs of grey. Somewhere, a rooster crows too early, confused by the colour of fog. It doesn't matter. The sound is hope, pretending not to be afraid. The streets are quieter than dreams. Footprints from yesterday curve through the snow, soft and uncertain. A lamplighter walks home, his pole carried like a staff, his eyes half closed against the chill. Milk carts roll slowly, their wheels squeaking in complaint. Even the horses move gently, as though unwilling to break the spell of stillness. The air feels sacred, not warm yet, but willing. In doorways, shopkeepers test their locks, stamping their feet to wake them. Curtains twitch, revealing faces lit by dawn's hesitant glow. A woman shakes crumbs from a cloth, scattering them for the birds who never left. The city's first conversation begins. A clink of bottles, a call, a bark, a yawn. The noise is tender, as if London is reminding itself how to speak. Inside homes, the fires are coaxed back to life. Embers that slept through the night blush again. Kettles sing softly, the sound of comfort rehearsing itself. Bread toasts over coals, butter melts, and suddenly the ordinary feels divine. Morning doesn't need miracles, it just needs light. By the river, the fog begins to drift apart, revealing the outline of bridges and spires. The water moves lazily, dragging thin ribbons of ice behind it. Gulls cry above the thaw, and their voices echo like forgiveness. The city's pulse quickens, slow, measured, inevitable. Men step out with collars raised, newspapers tucked under arms. Women carry baskets, steam rising from their breath. The cold is still there, but softer now, an old enemy that's finally learned to knock before entering. From somewhere distant, a church bell rings once, clear, certain. It sounds like gratitude, and for the first time in months, the light doesn't feel borrowed. It feels earned. Colour returns quietly, like a memory half remembered. At first, it hides. A blush on brick, a shimmer on thawing water, a single green thread on a tree too stubborn to die. Then it spreads, cautious but unstoppable. The grey of winter begins to fade, replaced by something tender, something human. The air smells different now. The bite is still there, but sweetness lingers underneath. Damp soil, wet wool, the faint promise of growth. Women hang laundry outside, watching it flutter like surrendered flags. For months, the city forgot it had colour. Now it remembers. Gaslight fades earlier each evening. The sun takes back its kingdom, painting rooftops in gold and rose. Children squint against brightness they'd forgotten existed. Painters appear again by the river, their fingers red but determined. They mix pigments as if resurrecting something sacred. Markets bloom before the gardens do. Stalls burst with oranges, ribbons, and noise. The smell of bread deepens. The chatter grows warmer. A man sells tulips from Holland, their petals trembling in the breeze. People buy them not for beauty, but for proof that life, even after so much grey, insists on returning. In homes, quilts are folded, heavy drapes replaced with lace. Fireplaces burn less fiercely, more for company than need. The sound of the city changes too. Footsteps sound lighter, laughter stays longer. Hope, once a theory, becomes texture. By the Thames, the ice has gone completely. The river runs brown and honest, carrying reflections of cranes, clouds, and courage. A barge passes slowly, its wake shattering sunlight into fragments. Everything looks alive, even the things that aren't. And yet, people remain cautious. They know warmth can vanish. They've learned to love it without trusting it. That's why they linger longer in the sun, because joy, like fire, is most beautiful when it's fleeting. London doesn't bloom, it exhales. At night, when the new warmth feels fragile, people still sit by their fires, not from need, but nostalgia. The flame no longer shouts, it whispers. It hums of evenings survived and seasons past. The coals glow like old memories, not bright, but faithful. A woman folds laundry by the hearth, pausing to stare at the embers. They remind her of faces, her father's laughter, her child's fever, her husband's steady hands stacking wood. Every flicker is a fragment of time replayed in light. She doesn't move to add more coal. Some fires deserve to rest. The room smells of smoke and clean linen. The walls hold warmth the way skin holds touch. Faint, but present. You can almost hear the echo of past winters, all the quiet conversations the fire once overheard. Fires are historians. They record without judgment. Outside, The wind scratches softly at the windows, curious but harmless now. The house no longer trembles. It breathes. The flame bends, sighs, releases a final spark. The sound is almost human, like someone remembering to sleep. People learned to find peace in endings. The Victorians, for all their ceremony, understood this truth better than most, that even ashes carry meaning. They'd rake them carefully, leaving no mess, as if tidiness could make goodbyes easier. And when the last glow faded, they didn't mourn it, they thanked it. Fire, after all, never truly dies. It becomes light elsewhere. Every warmth you've ever known still burns somewhere. In someone's kitchen, in a stranger's hands, in the sun waiting behind tomorrow's fog. All we ever do is pass the ember forward. To the Victorians, warmth wasn't comfort, it was accomplishment. It said, I worked for this, I endured for this. Heat came from effort, from calluses, from choices. It was both reward and reminder. For the poor, a single coal was a miracle. For the rich, it was entitlement dressed as decorum. But even they understood its fragility. A blizzard could humble a mansion. A broken chimney could silence laughter. Warmth was never permanent. That's why they cherished it. For mothers, it meant safety. They pressed children against their chests, breathing heat into tiny hands. For fathers, it meant pride, a fire that didn't die before morning. For lovers, it meant permission, the courage to sit closer, to touch without reason. For the elderly, it meant memory, the familiar pulse of a world that still recognized them. The hearth was confession, communion, sanctuary. It made equals of everyone who knelt before it. There were no classes in front of a flame, only degrees of gratitude. Even death carried warmth's echo. Funerals were followed by tea. Grief softened by steam and blankets. The living gathered to retell stories by the same fires the dead once tended. Flames blurred the line between memory and presence. Warmth was not an element. It was emotion made visible. It flickered, demanded attention, and vanished if ignored. It reminded people to care, for flame, for others, for themselves. Perhaps that's why the city never truly froze. Beneath its soot and sorrow, it remembered how to share heat. One hand, one cup, one story at a time. To be warm in that world was to be human. It never ends loudly. Winter retreats in whispers. The drip of melting icicles, the flutter of birds testing the air, the sigh of chimneys no longer needed. The world exhales, slow and grateful. Even silence changes key. You wake one morning and realize the windows aren't frozen. The kettle whistles sooner. The air smells faintly of mud instead of metal. The difference is small, but undeniable. Survival has shifted into living. In the streets, people walk slower, not from fatigue, but wonder. Children splash in puddles that were ice yesterday. The baker hums. The lamplighter smiles at his reflection in a window. Every face carries the same quiet astonishment. We made it. Snow lingers in corners, stubborn and nostalgic, but even it begins to shrink, surrendering gracefully to sunlight. Roofs gleam wet, streets shine black, and the city seems new, as if rinsed of its own exhaustion. The cold doesn't vanish. It retreats politely. It leaves reminders. The crack in the wall, the scar on the knuckle, the memory of shivering beside someone kind. but that's all right. Even hardship has the decency to say goodbye. As evening falls and you hear it, not absence, but balance, the steady hum of life resuming, horses clip-clop, children laugh, doors close softly. The city hums again. London, weary but alive, leans towards spring. Its heart, made of fire, fog, and faith, beats on. And in that rhythm, winter ends. Candles burned slower in March, as though they, too, were tired of surviving. The wax softened unevenly, collapsing in folds that looked like time melting. The smell was faintly sweet. Tallow, smoke, a hint of citrus from a match just struck. Each flame was a conversation partner for the lonely. It mattered because light, in winter, was less about seeing and more about remembering. Think of it as nostalgia with a wick. You can almost hear it hum. People learned to read their days by candle behavior, the way it leaned, fluttered, or refused to burn at all. A quick flame meant wind coming. A tall one meant peace. Why it mattered? Fire was mood, prophecy, and entertainment combined. Dry parallel, checking your weather app for emotion. You notice how shadows seem to lean closer just to listen. In tenements, candles were shared luxuries, one per family, sometimes per floor. Neighbors borrowed flame the way modern friends borrow Wi-Fi. The simple act of lighting another wick felt holy. It mattered because generosity glowed brightest when cheap. Dry smile, community built on combustion. You sense how every spark carried someone's name. Wealthier homes displayed candlesticks like trophies. Silver, polished to the point of vanity. Yet the flame itself looked the same everywhere, trembling, mortal, kind. It refused to obey class. Why it mattered? Nature democratizes beauty. Modern echo, same sun, different curtains. You appreciate the irony that light is loyal only to darkness. Writers and readers favored candlelight. The glow softened reality, made thoughts slower, sentences warmer, ink shimmered, paper blushed. It mattered because art needs imperfection to breathe. Dry humor. Every masterpiece was once a fire hazard. You imagine Dickens leaning closer, squinting, not from ambition, but gratitude. Children stared at flame until they dreamed of it, the way it danced, breathed, grew tired. Parents warned them not to stare too long or they'd see ghosts, which might have been true. Why it mattered? Curiosity is the soul's candle. You remember your own habit of staring into light when words ran out. Candles accompanied everything. Love letters, prayers, mourning, meals, endings. They were the punctuation marks of life, brief, glowing, irreplaceable. It mattered because humanity still believes that to face darkness politely, you bring a flame. And when the final candle guttered, its smoke rose like a memory that refused to leave quietly. The air smelled faintly of resolve. If winter had a flavor, it was tea. Earthy, smoky, faintly bitter. A drink that asked nothing but patience. The kettle hissed like punctuation. The cup steamed like a promise. In those moments, silence felt companionable. It mattered because warmth you can sip lasts longer than warmth you can see. Think of it as drinkable sunlight. The ritual mattered as much as the beverage. Water first, leaves second, conversation optional. People poured hope into teapots, believing in temperature as therapy, dry humour, early British mindfulness, sponsored by China. You could tell character by steeping time. The impulsive drank early, the wise waited. For the poor, tea was dignity. Even when sugar was rare and milk thinner than honesty, the act of brewing meant control. It tasted like civility rescued from hardship. It mattered because ceremony defies despair. Modern echo. Setting an alarm, you know you'll snooze, but doing it anyway. You sense the quiet rebellion in every sip. Factories and offices rang their bells for tea breaks. Work paused, breath synchronized. The sound of spoons against porcelain was music of the middle class. It mattered because rest became institutionalized, mercy built into machinery. Dry aside, productivity's soft apology. You picture steam curling above blueprints and ledgers alike. At home, tea mended more than bodies. It soothed arguments, sealed friendships, eased grief. No sermon ever matched its efficiency. Why it mattered? Warmth shared is faith performed. You realize that the kettle's whistle is London's smallest hymn. Travellers carried it everywhere, in tins, flasks, memory. Soldiers brewed it in trenches, explorers in ice, mothers beside sickbeds. The empire may have built trade routes, but tea built endurance. Dry humour, caffeine disguised as compassion. You taste the collective sigh of a civilization caffeinated against collapse. Evening tea was gentler. The spoon's soft clink sounded like closure. The room dimmed, and the world shrank to cup, chair, and quiet. It mattered because stillness needed props. Think of it as theatre for one, written in steam. You inhale, and time slows to the speed of warmth. And long after the last sip, the smell lingered. Faint, honest, eternal. Before alarm clocks, light did the waking. Windows turned pale before the mind caught up. Frost patterns softened, and the world outside looked almost forgiving. You could hear carriages begin again, the city stretching after its long sleep. It mattered because every morning was proof that endurance had worked. Think of it as the universe saying, quietly, "Good job." Windows were storytellers. In winter, they remembered every breath, every handprint, every attempt to see through fog. Children traced drawings in condensation, hearts, initials, castles, melting by noon. Why it mattered? Imagination resists temperature. Dry humour, early touchscreen technology powered by boredom. You watch light rewrite the glass. Inside, curtains stirred with cautious optimism. Women aired rooms despite the cold, letting in air that bit like truth. Sheets flapped, feathers flew, floors creaked. It mattered because cleansing the air meant cleansing the spirit. Modern echo. Deleting old files with a sense of ceremony. You feel how the house inhales renewal. Windowsills held plants, letters, sometimes just dust arranged by light. Even in poverty, people decorated edges. Why it mattered? Boundaries deserve beauty too. Dry remark. Instagram would have loved their minimalism. You see a jar catching sunlight like confession caught mid-sentence. From the street you could read entire lives by curtains, lace for pride, newspaper for poverty, frost for both. The city was a novel written in fabric. It mattered because privacy is always a dialogue, not a wall. Think of it as communication through opacity. You learn to recognize kindness in untidy windows. Birds returned first, small, nervous, endlessly optimistic. Their song sliced through fog like truth you didn't ask for. It mattered because joy doesn't need permission. Dry humor. Earliest unsolicited notifications, you smile despite yourself. By full morning, glass turned clear again. People saw each other, eyes met through panes. Brief, awkward, human. It mattered because recognition is the purest form of warmth. You feel the temperature rise by 1 degree. And when sunlight finally flooded the room, it felt less like rescue and more like reward. You know it instantly of a tea with the wet, metallic scent that announces the end of a season. The ground softens, boots sink deeper, air tastes of rust and renewal. It's not pleasant, but it's honest. The smell of thaw is the smell of truth returning. It mattered because spring begins in scent before sight. Think of it as memory rehydrated. Rain joins in, polite but persistent, washing soot into gutters and stories into the Thames. Roofs drip, eaves mutter. The city complains like an old man stretching. It mattered because discomfort precedes growth. Dry humor. The universe rebooting without saving files. You watch a puddle reflect an entirely new sky. Street vendors return, sleeves rolled, voices louder, markets smell of cabbage and optimism. People bargain harder, not because they're cruel, but because they can finally afford to argue. It mattered because sound itself feels warmer now. Modern echo, the hum of a restarted engine. You sense commerce turning into conversation again. In courtyards, clotheslines bloom. Sheets ripple like flags of surrender, admitting winter's departure. The color, white, reclaims innocence for a week or two. It mattered because small domestic acts rebuild civilization. Dry aside, progress measured in laundry. You hear cloth snapping in wind and call it applause. Children wade into melted snow, inventing rivers out of sidewalks. Their laughter carries like prophecy. Why it mattered. Joy announces itself through recklessness. You realize resilience has a sound, light, wet, and fearless. The poor repair roofs, the rich order new carpets. The city, both sides of it, exhales. Brick darkens, air clears, promises resurface. It mattered because restoration is collective, even when uncoordinated. Dry smile. Chaos is democracy's favorite rhythm. You breathe easier with everyone else. At night, fog returns briefly, nostalgic for relevance. But it feels gentler now, more like a story being retold than a threat remembered. It mattered because even memory needs redemption. Think of it as cold performing an encore. And when the first green shoots push through the cracks in pavement, they look like punctuation marks at the end of a long sentence the world was finally ready to finish. When winter leaves, it never cleans up after itself. The walls remember dampness. Boots carry salt scars. Hearts keep the echo of nights too quiet to bear. Yet absence itself feels like warmth now. It mattered because survival transforms residue into relic. Think of it as the archaeology of gratitude. You trace frost marks like fingerprints of persistence. People talk about the cold the way soldiers talk about wars, exaggerated, selective, sacred. Every storyteller adds a blizzard that never happened. It mattered because hardship, once endured, turns heroic by default. Dry smile. History loves a good exaggeration. You nod knowingly at exaggerations worth keeping. In homes, blankets are folded with respect. Coal scuttles stand empty but not forgotten. Children chase sunlight through rooms that smell faintly of soap and freedom. Why it mattered. Symbols retire gracefully when purpose ends. Modern echo. Uninstalling apps that saved your life once. You feel a soft melancholy shaped like contentment. The city repairs itself quietly. Masons patch walls, lamplighters polish glass, bakers sweep ash from ovens. Every act is restoration disguised as routine. It mattered because peace is rarely loud. Dry remark. Maintenance as philosophy. You admire how ordinary people make stability look accidental. Nature returns shyly, grass hesitant, trees cautious, birds improvising faith. The city pretends not to notice, afraid to jinx it. It mattered because all works best unannounced. Think of it as the miracle of pretending things were always this way. You breathe in the modesty of rebirth. People begin to plan again. Trips, weddings, debts, futures. The world remembers verbs. It mattered because imagination requires warmth. Dry humor. Hope has terrible timing, always showing up when you've just folded your coat. You laugh softly at the predictability of relief. And when night falls without bitterness, everyone feels slightly confused. Comfort takes practice. It mattered because happiness, too, demands endurance. You let the calm feel unfamiliar. Spring doesn't replace winter. It forgives it. And now the streets are clear. The lamps burn low, and you've walked through 2.5 hours of history and breath. The snow that once buried sound has melted into memory. You can hear your own breathing now, steady, rhythmic, kind. The Victorians didn't just survive the cold, they made meaning from it. Every frostbitten morning, every candle, every borrowed ember, they all whispered the same thing. Warmth is proof of attention. And maybe that's all any of us ever need. To notice, to tend, to stay. Outside your window, night waits gently. Somewhere, a kettle clicks. Somewhere else, a street lamp hums. The world keeps breathing without asking you to join in. If this story brought you stillness tonight, if you felt a little lighter, a little warmer, leave a like before you drift away. And subscribe so you can return whenever the world feels heavy again. Now, close your eyes. The fog has lifted. The fire has done its work. You are safe. You are warm. You can rest. Sleep well.